A few moments ago we heard the all clear of air raid sirens, and we are trying to capture this picture of the skyline of Tel Aviv at night, in which the citizens of Tel Aviv seem to be coping very well under the stress and fear of wondering when the next missile attack will occur and whether Saddam Hussein will finally, after all, try to use poison gas, unconventional weapons on the citizens of a country that have done nothing at all in the world to provoke any violence from him. Shalom, I'm Richard Peritz, and I'm at the Hilton Hotel in Tel Aviv, Israel, where we just arrived from the USA. In this hotel, the IDF Spokesman's office and the Israel Government Press Office and Foreign Ministry have their nerve centers for foreign journalists and so forth, which is why we're at this location. And a few moments ago, we heard the air raid sirens sound the all clear, so we assume it was just a false alarm. Nevertheless, as required, we have gas masks close at hand, and we're here to cover events and to conduct in-depth interviews with Israeli leaders, and will proceed right after these messages. It's now been confirmed that an Iraqi Scud missile did land somewhere in the southern part of Israel. Yet another unprovoked attack of terrorism against Israel that so far has restrained itself and has not retaliated. But I'd like you to know and understand the meaning of restraint after you realize how much damage and injury was caused to Israel and what it means to men, women and children to have to put on gas masks like this gas mask that scares little children so much. And for you to understand also the meaning of using the paraphernalia you get, every person in Israel gets, like we got when we arrived at Ben Gurion Airport, this powder to cleanse your skin of chemical, mustard gas, God knows what else. And the meaning of having to consider injecting yourself with this atropine injection, stabbing yourself in the thigh or some other part of your body to prevent death from poison gas. Finally, another item we received upon arrival was this little Israeli flag. And this flag symbolizes the spirit of light and hope and vision of the Jewish people, even in times of crisis.
On Friday, January 18th, at 2 a.m. in the morning, the first Scud missiles made their way to the greater Tel Aviv area. Almost without advance notice, the people of Israel are thrown into the front line of the Gulf War 1,000 miles away. Like the aftermath of an earthquake, scenes of destruction, shock, and human misery. The civil defense units and the rescue teams, which have trained for this moment, arrive on the scene. Evacuation, rescue operations, as well as emergency medical treatment begin immediately. The shock and horror are reflected in people's faces and eyes. Without panic or loss of control, the residents of this densely populated neighborhood recount the devastating moments.
אני אומר לך, בקיצור, אתה יכול לעשות את זה במילה אחת, נס. אחותי, פתחתי את הדלת, היא הייתה גם ישנה, פתחתי את הדלת, אני רואה כל החדר שלה קרוס. התחלתי לבעוט שם באבנים, אמרתי אולי אני אוציא אותה מתחת לעריפה. כן, כן. אני קורא בשמה, אני רואה אותה מחוץ לבית. תזיז. מי?
That same night, another Scud missile strikes a steel construction plant. Some of the missile fragments hit a nearby textile factory. This time, No casualties, but the damage is extensive. January 19th, 7:15 in the morning. Another missile attack. In less than 24 hours, a whole society is propelled into a tense, high-alert situation. Gas masks, protective kits. This is a strange war. The citizens in the rear are now the frontline soldiers. January 22nd, the third Scud missile attack. This time, a direct hit on an apartment building. Rescue teams, ambulances, and medics are working frantically against the clock to reach in time the injured trapped under the rubble. These scenes seem to be implanted on this quiet neighborhood as taken from another time in other places of mass destruction around the world. On the 25th of January, the fourth missile attack within a week.
המשקפיים שלי מהמיטה ובאתי לשים את המסכה ולא הספקתי, עפתי כמו יאללה, זה נורא. איזה כמה אבק ולא כמה חול. הילדים אצל חברה, אבל אני לא יודעת, אני מקווה שהם לא חטפו אלה מכל הכ...
לא, שום דבר, הכל בסדר.
The civil defense units and the civilian rescue teams have quickly and efficiently taken full control of the situation, thus preventing chaos and panic.
עם דייר מקומה ראשונה דיברתי, הוא יצא. מקומה שנייה פינינו שתי אנשים, שלחנו לבית חולים. מקומה שלישית, דייר מקומה מספר אחת, אמר כאילו שהם היום עזבו את הדירה. הם יבואו, החבר'ה שלי יבואו.
For the residents of this neighborhood, the sudden change from the safety and security of their homes to the shock, agony, and uncertainty of being left with virtually nothing is sometimes overwhelming.
ופה כל הדלתות, כל החלונות, אנחנו היינו בחול והיה בסדר. הכל נופל. ראיתי אש למעלה והשון הגדול, והשכנים צוחקים, ואנחנו הולכים לראות כל הבית שמה.
מה קרה לבית שלך?
הנה, במרפסת, כל המרפסות, כל התריסות. את לא היית שמה, בואי תראה.
תשאל רק אם אצלך טיפול רפואי. טיפול רפואי? קרה לך משהו?
לא, ברוך השם.
But even with the tragedy and destruction all around, the high spirit, perseverance, and morale of these people prevails over panic and despair.
שמענו אזעקה, נכנסנו לפינה של הבית, התכסרנו עם זה, לי עפה המסכה מהפנים, כיסיתי את הילדים, הכל בסדר, הוצאתי אותם החוצה, יצאתי לבד. יצאתי החוצה, ניסיתי להציל שם את האנשים, צעקו לי, ניסיתי להציל את האנשים, לא הלך פשוט. היו שם בלון עם גז, בלי ראש, הוצאתי את הגזים, כיסיתי אותם בחול, נכנסתי פנימה, ניסיתי להוציא, פשוט לא הלך. רצתי לקרוא למכבש ולמגן דוד, וזהו, אבל זה לא מה שישבור אותנו.
These missile attacks did cause some casualties, but much more evident is the mass destruction in residential neighborhoods. Hundreds of apartments were damaged. Over 50 buildings are beyond repair. Each damaged and destroyed apartment tells a personal story of years of labor and building family life which have suddenly been disrupted. But these people, with their tenacity, resilience, and perseverance, made it possible for Israel to adopt a policy of self-restraint and prevail in face of Saddam Hussein's effort to drag us into the war. In the darkest moments of this crisis, these scenes and sights may well be remembered as the people of Israel's finest hour.
Here with us is Colonel Raanan Gissin. Raanan, it's a pleasure to have you back on the Shalom Show.
Thank you.
Raanan, maybe one of the only good things about this particular war that the world has witnessed is that perhaps for a moment people might be reminded that Israel is not an obstacle to peace in the Middle East, but perhaps it is Arab belligerency. Would you like to elaborate a little on this point for us?
Well, there's no doubt that what we have strived to explain for so many years about the size and dimensions of Israel living in this rough neighborhood is finally getting home without too much effort on our part. There's no doubt that of all the Arab countries surrounding us in the Middle East, Israel is probably the shining bright star of democracy. Other countries, you look at Iraq, for example, or even those who allied themselves with the United States against Iraq, are all authoritarian, autocratic regimes, one man, one rule, some better, some worse. And clearly we're dealing with an environment which is conducive to the emergence of such madmen like Saddam Hussein, leaders who have no concern for human life, leaders who have no concern for the welfare and well-being of their own country, who are able to drive the Middle East crazy and the rest of the world with it. And if you look at Israel in that perspective, then you see an island of sanity and stability, really, in the Middle East. I think today people can appreciate those qualities much more than before the Gulf War.
Could you give our viewers an overview of the conflicts that have taken place and have existed between Israel and its Arab neighbors these last 42-odd years?
Well, in a nutshell, it's a question of accepting the right of a non-Arab, non-Muslim entity, its right to exist in the Middle East. The Arabs have not come to terms with that concept yet, psychologically at least. Egypt has accepted Israel's right to exist in the Middle East as a fact, but you can see clearly that psychologically the Egyptian people have not yet digested the fact that there is here a Jewish sovereign state. That is, a state that is non-Muslim and non-Arab in character and in nature, which has a right to exist. This is the crux of the conflict. On top of that, there are several other issues which have been created or developed in the past 42 years in order to bolster Arab positions and to claim that Israel has no right to exist. So in order to make that point very clearly, the whole Palestinian issue was created. And of course then assumed a life of its own, because the Palestinian people came to believe that we are those who took their land away. The Palestinian people started believing that we are the source of all evil and their predicament. Whereas in fact, what we're seeing today, the way Saddam Hussein has led the Palestinian astray, and the mistakes that they have conducted throughout this whole campaign, time and again we're seeing that the Palestinians have not learned from the mistakes of the past. For the past 42 years, they were always led by leaders who promised them heaven and gave them hell. And you look at the situation today, and if you try to analyze what happened to the poor Palestinians, well, one can summarize it and say that they were always used, misused, and abused by this or that Arab leader. By a mega Arafat like Saddam Hussein, or a minor Arafat like Yasser.
This is most interesting, Raanan. I'd like us to continue, but we have to pause for these messages. We are back with Colonel Raanan Gissin of the Israel Defense Forces. Raanan, a question one cannot avoid is the Palestinian problem. A people that does exist, whose rights and existence have to be addressed. However, I would like you also, in doing so, to remind the viewer that the Palestinians were totally ignored by Egypt and Jordan in those years after 1948 until 1967, when they had control over the so-called territories on the Gaza Strip. So please kindly, for our viewers, elaborate on this subject.
Well, I think the real problem of the Palestinians is the tragedy of leadership that they've encountered throughout the past 42 years of their struggle. Palestinian Arabs have always been led astray by Arab leaders or by their own leaders. I think this point came through very clearly. When the first Scud missiles were launched towards Israel, the Palestinian Arabs were standing on rooftops hailing and clapping their hands when the missiles were directed towards the city of Tel Aviv, impacting in Tel Aviv. And they were applauding Saddam Hussein. They were standing on the roofs and living their illusions. And what happened is that at the end of 42 days, their leader and his war machine lay destroyed, and so were their dreams. But they're still on the roofs. And now I think is the real moment of truth for the Palestinian people. This moment has arrived in conjunction with a new order. Either they adjust themselves to the new order, get off the roof and down to earth and start negotiating with Israelis directly and then be able to attain some of their aspirations, or they will forever continue with this tragic situation where time and again they are led, misled, misused by one of their leaders or by an Arab leader that decides to use their cause cynically for his purpose. And I think this moment of truth is arriving. The Palestinian Arabs know that we have made certain offers for them, offers that are now clearly in their benefits. Because if they refuse these offers today, when their position in the Arab world has deteriorated so much, when the Kuwaiti people and the Saudis who have financed the Palestinians and their terrorist organization no longer want to continue in that, they must face the reality. Get off the roof, stop with those terrorist activities, throw away the wooden Scud missiles that they're building, and start talking real business with Israel. I think this is a testing point, a testing period of the maturity of the Palestinian people, not of their leadership. And if their leadership, Yasser Arafat and his associates, are not mature enough to understand this new reality, then they should be replaced by the Palestinian people.
Immigration to the State of Israel has always been a cornerstone in the development of the state. How significant to Israel's destiny is this immense current immigration of Soviet immigrants to Israel?
Well, I would say that the Gulf crisis is over, but the battle over immigration has just begun. We had an immediate crisis in the Gulf which we had to take care of, and clearly we demonstrated our ability as a society to stand together in face of such threats and to prove to Saddam Hussein that as a society we're good or even better than the Israeli army, and we can perform the task that is required of us. But at the same time, I pointed out, we are facing now only the beginning of the major struggle. The crisis was an immediate event which we had to take care of. The struggle for immigration is an ongoing struggle which is going to take all the efforts, all the resources, all the concerted efforts of the Jewish people in order to be able to accomplish this task and goal. And I think the ability of Israel to absorb 1 million Russian Jews, or even more, in 3 years, in 4 years, is going to be the most important test for the Jewish state, and is going to be the most important national security asset that we are going to possess when we march into the 21st century. And therefore we must pull together all our resources. And if we do that now, then clearly our political posture, our strategic position, and our place around the table when the new agenda is presented will be safer and secure than it is today. And therefore it's not just for the sake of the sacred mission of bringing in Jews that we have to accomplish this task, but we must also accomplish it so that we can show the world our real strength, show the world, as we showed during the crisis in the Gulf, that even while Scud missiles were flying towards Tel Aviv, plane loads of immigrants were flying from the west and landing at Ben Gurion Airport. And I think this is the true test of the resilience, the tenacity, and the perseverance of the Jewish people. And we must not stop it now. And I think it will depend very much on the assistance, on the help, on the concerted effort of every Jew today in the United States. Look, the Gulf War has ended. American troops, soldiers who are fighting there, some 500,000, are on their way back home. This is the time that the Jewish people will have to feel their troops so that we will win our war to ensure that Jewish immigration continues to Israel and that Israel emerges out of this war, out of this struggle, stronger than it was before these immigration waves began.
Israel, thank God, does very well defending itself on the battlefield in war after war, and hopefully there'll be no more. However, it is stated that Israel has been losing the PR war. How important is it for Israel to address this particular issue?
Clearly, we had some setbacks in terms of explaining our position, in terms of trying to get that message across. And I think here there's no doubt that professional expertise and people, the right people at the right places, at the right moments, or I should say at the right seconds, clearly make a difference in getting that message across. But the best PR guy in the world, the most eloquent and articulate spokesman that the State of Israel can put forth, will not be able to get the message across if he wasn't projecting the message of the true Israel, the vibrant Israel, the Israel that is represented by the sparkling eyes of young children in the streets, by new immigrants getting off the gangplank and kissing the earth because they know they have come to a bastion of stability. They have finally come to their homeland. So what I try to represent in the words I carry, in the message I deliver, is clearly those images of Israel, the true Israel that at times gets forgotten and does not reach the consciousness of the American people. I have no doubt that we are entering now the information age battlefield. And on this battlefield, television is the most powerful tool. But you've got to know how to use that weapon. And I think when we have programs like yours, Richard, the Shalom Show, on the air, which provide us with an agenda by which we can project the true image of Israel, by which we can deliver the messages that I alluded to, I think we can do the extra mileage that is necessary in order to bring Israel's story to the hearts and minds of the people of America, and particularly the Jewish people. I think when you have a format of a half-an-hour program, like the Shalom Show, you can get all those messages that you can't fit into the 30 and 20-second sound bites that appear on nightly news. And clearly this is the opportunity where you can really try and talk to the American people. Not talk at them, but talk to them. And therefore I can't really quantify the importance of such programs which provide us with that kind of agenda that can reach so many people, so many Jewish people that otherwise are left untouched by our message and by our pictures.
Thank you so much. Raanan, this has been a great pleasure. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
This brings us to the end of our program for today. From On Location at the Hilton, Tel Aviv, I'm Richard Peritz. Thank you for being with us.